I didn't ask for a promotion. I didn't demand a corner office. I asked for a 5% raise after 3 years of overtime, weekend work, and missed holidays. 5%. That's what it took for my boss to laugh in my face. The sound of it, his laughter, still echoed in my head as I sat frozen across from him. My hands were clenched in my lap beneath the conference table. I had rehearsed my pitch for days. I'd even printed charts showing the revenue increase from the client accounts I managed. I wore my best blazer and a calm smile, but nothing prepared me for the dismissiveness in his voice. "Melissa," Darren said, leaning back in his chair like he was settling in for entertainment. "If you want more money, get a job elsewhere." He chuckled as if he had made some clever joke. 5%, he muttered again, shaking his head. I smiled politely, though my heart was thudding. "Thank you for your time," I said quietly. I gathered my papers with steady fingers, though inside something broke. Not my confidence. That was long gone. Something deeper. Like the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for years. I'm Melissa Carter, 32, Senior Account Coordinator at Jennings & Rowe Marketing. And until that moment, I'd always been the kind of employee bosses said they could rely on. I never missed a deadline. Took the messiest clients and made them happy. Stayed late, came in early, never complained. And I'd asked for a raise once. Just once. I walked back to my desk. Not even an office, just a corner space by the copy machine. And stared at my screen. My coffee was cold. My inbox was full. Another project had been dumped on me that morning, because Melissa gets things done. They always said that like it was a compliment. Before I go any further, I want to ask those of you watching, have you ever been in a situation like this? Where loyalty felt one-sided? Let me know in the comments. And hit that like button if you've ever stayed too long somewhere that didn't see your worth. It helps more people find this story, because what happened next might help someone else find their voice. That night, I stayed late. Again, finishing a campaign presentation for a client Darren had forgotten about. When I finally left the building, it was nearly 9 p.m. The parking lot was empty except for the same 3 cars always left behind. Mine, the cleaning crew's, and Darren's. I sat in my car for a long moment, watching the building. The same glass windows I'd looked through every day for 3 years. And I thought about the time I spent trying to prove my worth, as if worth needed to be earned through exhaustion. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened LinkedIn. The message icon had a red notification. I tapped it. "Melissa, if you're ever open to a conversation, we'd love to chat. Your work with Carrington Corp didn't go unnoticed." It was from Emily Saunders, VP of Strategy at Kensington & Wells, our biggest competitor. The message was 2 months old. I stared at it, my finger hovering. Darren's voice echoed. "If you want more money, get a job elsewhere." I replied, "Hi, Emily. Thank you for reaching out. If you're still interested, I'd be happy to have that conversation." Her response came 5 minutes later. "Let's talk tomorrow. I'll call you at noon." I sat back in my car seat, adrenaline rising like I'd done something rebellious. But all I'd done was respond to an offer, an open door. The next morning, I arrived at work at 8:15. Darren walked in at 10:03. He gave me a wink and said, "Still here, Melissa?" "After all that drama?" I smiled back. "Of course, I've got a full day ahead." He didn't know I'd be taking the call that would change everything in 3 hours. I returned to my desk, opened the Carrington file, and started typing the final report I'd promised by Friday. Not because I owed it to him, but because it was mine. My work, my name on every line. At 11:59, I stood up and walked to the empty break room, closed the door, sat down at the small round table where people left forgotten bagels. At 12 o'clock sharp, my phone rang. "Melissa, this is Emily." And just like that, the next chapter of my life began. With one phone call, one open door, one boss's arrogance too blind to see value staring him in the face. I didn't know it yet, but the next 48 hours would reshape everything. "Melissa? This is Emily." Her voice was warm, confident, the kind of voice you instinctively trust. I straightened my posture without realizing it. "Hi, Emily. Thank you for calling. I've followed your work since the Carrington project," she said. "That campaign changed the game. The targeting logic, the conversion boost. It was surgical." I blinked. Darren had taken full credit for that project. At the client meeting, he hadn't even mentioned my name. I'd done the research, built the framework, ran the A/B tests until the numbers made sense. But the client only knew his. "Thank you," I said carefully. "Let's get to the point," Emily said. "We want you here. You're not just talented, you're underutilized. And I know what that feels like." That last part, "I know what that feels like," hit deeper than I expected. "What's the role?" I asked. "Senior campaign strategist. You'd lead your own team. Salary's 35% higher than your current one, with bonuses, profit sharing, and full creative freedom. We don't micromanage talent here." I had to take a breath. "That's generous." "It's fair," she said firmly. "Fair for what you bring to the table. I already ran it by HR. If you want the job, it's yours, but I need an answer within 24 hours. 24 hours? I was expecting a drawn-out process. Interviews, vetting, negotiations, but they already knew my worth. From the outside. Something my own boss never even cared to learn. "I'll call you tomorrow," I said. "Thank you." After I hung up, I didn't move for a long time. Just stared at the break room fridge humming beside me. Somewhere down the hall, Darren was probably cracking jokes over lunch about how needy employees were these days. At 12:30, I returned to my desk and found another task waiting. Urgent, of course. "Can you take care of this?" Darren's email read, "You're the only one I trust to clean up this mess." Funny. Trust me to clean the mess, but not to lead, not to earn more, not to matter. That night I called my mom. She used to work the late shift at a pharmacy while raising me. She understood sacrifice. "You're not seriously thinking about staying, are you?" she asked after I told her about the offer. "I've been at Jennings & Rowe for years. It feels wrong to just leave." "Melissa," she said softly, "wrong is giving your time, your soul to someone who sees you as a tool. You didn't leave. They pushed you." I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about how long I'd bent myself in half to make myself small enough to fit into a system that never made space for me. About how many nights I'd worked past midnight just to prove I was good enough. The next morning, I got up early, made fresh coffee, and sent one message. "Emily, I'm in. Let me know the next steps." Her reply came instantly. "Welcome to the team. We'll send over the formal offer and onboarding package by noon." I stared at those words. Welcome to the team. I hadn't heard that since my first day at Jennings & Rowe. And even then, it was said half-heartedly by an overworked receptionist. But now it meant something. At 9 a.m., I walked into the office like any other day, said good morning to reception, sat at my desk, smiled at the people who never noticed when I stayed late or skipped lunch. But inside, I was different. By 10:30, the offer letter was in my inbox. The numbers made my chest tighten. The benefits. The title. The opportunity. I printed the offer, folded it, slipped it into my bag. Then I did something petty. Maybe. Or maybe it was necessary. At 11 o'clock, I asked Darren if he had a moment. He grinned. "Back for round 2? More raise negotiations?" "Not exactly." I handed him the letter. He unfolded it slowly. His grin faded. His eyes scanned the header. "Kensington and Wells. Offer of employment." The color drained from his face. "You're kidding," he said. "I'm not. But they're our biggest competitor, yes." Silence. "You said if I wanted more money, I should find another job," I said, keeping my voice calm. So I did. His mouth opened, then closed. "This is a joke. You won't last there. It's a pressure cooker." "I've worked 60-hour weeks for you for 3 years straight," I said, my voice firmer now. I think I'll manage. He stood up, suddenly agitated. This is betrayal, after everything I've done for you. I looked him in the eye. Everything you've done to me, you mean? Then I smiled. The kind of smile that says I'm finally done explaining myself. Don't worry, Darren, I added. Tomorrow will be my last day, and I'll make sure the transition is unforgettable. I arrived an hour early on my final day, not to be dramatic, not to make a statement, but because I wanted to walk through the office once more. The quiet, untouched version before people arrived. Before the noise, the small talk, the pretense. I had spent over 1,000 days here. Some of them full of pride. Most of them heavy with exhaustion, but today felt weightless. By the time Darren arrived, at 9:57 a.m., latte in hand as usual, I had already cleaned out my desk, packed my mug, my desk calendar, my favorite pen set, the framed photo of my niece from her birthday, the one I missed because of a client emergency. Darren barely looked at me as he walked by. He didn't say good morning, but I saw the tightness in his shoulders. He was unraveling. At 10:30, I sent the company-wide handover email. Short, professional, no drama. Just links to my documentation, organized folders, client notes, and a polite sign-off. Today is my last day. It's been a journey. Wishing everyone the best moving forward. Melissa. By 10:45, the messages started rolling in. From Julie in finance. Wait, you're leaving? What happened? From Kevin in client success. They're going to be in chaos without you. From Emma in creative. Tell me where you're going so I can follow you there. I didn't reply. Not yet. At 11 o'clock, Darren called me into his office. Again. Melissa, he started, forced calm in his voice. I've been thinking. I said nothing. Just looked at him. Maybe we were hasty yesterday. I shouldn't have laughed. That was unprofessional. It took everything in me not to smile. Look, he continued, I've spoken with HR. We can offer a 7% raise. Retroactive to January, I raised an eyebrow. It's a good offer, he added. Fair. Shows how much we value you. You value me now that I've got one foot out the door. I folded my hands. I appreciate the gesture, Darren, but I've already accepted another offer. He frowned. That doesn't have to be final. You haven't even left yet. We can match whatever they're offering. I leaned forward just slightly. Can you match a team that respects me? A manager who credits me for my work? A culture that promotes based on impact, not favoritism? He didn't answer. I'm not just leaving for money, I said quietly. I'm leaving because I was invisible here, until I became a threat. Darren exhaled sharply. If you go, you're burning bridges, Melissa. No, I said, standing. You lit the match the day you laughed at me for asking to be valued. I left his office without another word. It was noon when I got the text from Emily. Just confirming. You're still good to start Monday? Absolutely, I typed back. Let me know what to prep over the weekend. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. Actually, you might want to check your email. Thought you'd like to see this. I refreshed my inbox. A forwarded chain from a client I had worked with for months. A big one, Sterling Biotech. A note at the top from Sterling's VP. We're disappointed to hear Melissa is leaving. She was the main reason we stayed with Jennings and Rowe. Please confirm who will be handling our account as we're reconsidering our position. I stared at the screen, pulse racing. Attached was a copy of the email Sterling had sent to Darren. I forwarded it to my personal email and hit save. At 3 o'clock, I was called into HR. They handed me the exit paperwork, the usual forms. Confidentiality, non-disparagement, final paycheck confirmation. Then came the curveball. We'd like you to sign this non-compete, the HR rep said, sliding the last page toward me. I laughed. For the first time all week, I actually laughed. This wasn't in my original contract. I said. We're asking employees to agree to it going forward. Just a formality. I pushed it back across the table. I won't be signing that. But I'm leaving, not dying, and I'm not signing away my right to work. They looked stunned, as if they had never expected a polite, quiet employee like me to say no. At 4:15, I walked to Darren's office one last time, dropped off the company phone. My badge. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look at me, but I could feel the panic radiating off him like heat. I walked out of Jennings & Rowe for the final time at 4:23 p.m. No farewell party. No send-off. Just the quiet knowledge that everything had changed. The next morning would be Darren's to handle alone. Client calls, transition failures, questions he couldn't answer. And I would be nowhere near the fallout. Instead, I'd be walking into Kensington and Wells, with my name on the door, my work recognized, and my worth no longer a question. And that, I thought, was the beginning of something bigger than a raise. Monday morning at 8:30 a.m., I stepped into the sleek, open-floor headquarters of Kensington and Wells, sunlight spilling in through tall glass windows, voices buzzing with energy, and my name already printed on the welcome packet sitting on my new desk. "Welcome to the team, Melissa," the front desk assistant had said, offering me a fresh cup of coffee. "You're going to love it here." And I already did. My new office wasn't huge. It wasn't on a high floor or full of expensive furniture. But it had a door, a window, a quiet space that was mine. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I wasn't just occupying space. I belonged in it. Before I'd even logged into my new email, I saw it. The news. Subject line, Sterling Biotech terminates Jennings & Rowe contract. I clicked. An internal memo had been leaked. Sterling's leadership cited the departure of key personnel as a major reason. My name wasn't mentioned explicitly, but I didn't need it to be. Emily walked into my office just as I finished reading. She raised an eyebrow, holding her phone up. "I take it you've seen the news?" I nodded slowly. That was fast. "Turns out, when you're the glue, everything cracks once you leave." I smiled, but only halfway. "They'll blame me. They'll try," she said. "But the truth is, they let you go long before you walked out the door." I spent the morning meeting my new team. 3 brilliant strategists, 1 intern named Lexi, and a data scientist who reminded me of myself 5 years ago. Eager, careful, always waiting for approval. "You don't have to prove anything here," I told her when we sat down to review her first project draft. "If you've got ideas, bring them." She blinked, surprised. "Even if they're different from yours?" "Especially if they are." By 2 p.m., my inbox was flooded with news alerts, LinkedIn messages, and quiet whispers from former colleagues at Jennings & Rowe. From Emma, "Darren's freaking out. Sterling's gone. Now Bioplex is threatening to pull too." From Kevin, "He just called an emergency meeting. You should have seen his face." I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was clarity. This was never about punishing Darren. It was about what happens when a company builds its reputation on people it refuses to see. I didn't have time to dwell, though, because at 3:15, I was called into a leadership meeting with Emily and the executive team. "Melissa," the COO said, "Sterling has asked that you personally oversee the transition. They want continuity, confidence, and you." I blinked. Of course, I'd be honored. And just like that, I became the face of a $4.2 million contract. By Tuesday, the dust hadn't even settled, and yet Jennings & Rowe was hemorrhaging clients. 3 accounts had paused campaigns. 2 had requested exit clauses. I watched it unfold, not with glee, but with a strange sense of inevitability. This is what happens when leadership forgets that loyalty is earned, not owed. That afternoon, I got a message from Julie in finance. HR just announced layoffs. They're starting with account support. "Everyone's blaming you, Melissa." I stared at that message longer than I wanted to admit. I typed. Deleted. Typed again. then finally responded, "I'm sorry they're going through that. But I didn't cause this. They did, when they chose to ignore what their people were worth." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by a mix of pride and guilt. Pride in my decision. Guilt for the people who were now facing the fallout. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Lexi, about Emma and Kevin, about the people I used to eat lunch with at that sticky cafeteria table while Darren sat in steakhouse boardrooms taking credit for our work. And I thought about the cost of standing up. It wasn't just mine. The next morning, Emily knocked on my door. "I wanted to talk to you about something," she said, sitting down. "We're expecting more resumes from Jennings and Rowe, people looking for a place to land." I figured. "I'd like you to help us review them," she said, "especially for the Sterling team. You know who the strong ones are? Who deserves a second shot?" I felt something shift inside me. Power, not for revenge, but for restoration. "I'd be honored," I said. As she stood to leave, she paused. "Oh, and Darren reached out." I blinked. "What?" "He sent a message through the contact form on our site, asked for a meeting, said he'd like to consult for us, share insights about the client landscape." I let out a short breath. "What did you say?" "I said we already have the insight we need." Emily smiled. "Her name is Melissa." 3 weeks after my first day at Kensington and Wells, I stood at the head of the Sterling project team's strategy table, pointing to projected ROI graphs that made even the most skeptical execs lean forward. Every metric had gone up since the transition. Client satisfaction, deliverables met early, new campaign reach. My team delivered. Not because they feared me, but because they were heard, respected, trusted. And for the first time in my life, I was the one guiding the room. Not quietly, not from behind the scenes, but as a name on the report, a face in the pitch. Recognition felt strange, like walking into a new version of yourself you didn't know existed. Still, it came with a weight I hadn't expected, because while my star rose, Jennings and Rowe continued to unravel. By now, the layoffs had reached middle management. Word spread that Bioplex and Marintech had pulled out. Nearly half the office had been let go. The rest were living in constant fear. And my name was still on their lips. One afternoon, I received an email from Emma. She had always been the quietly brilliant designer who never got credit for her best work. "Melissa, they cut my whole team yesterday. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've never worked anywhere else. I just wanted you to know. I'm not mad. You did what we all wish we had the guts to do." That one stung more than I expected. I forwarded her portfolio to Emily. Within 2 days, Emma was being interviewed by our design director. But it wasn't just Emma. Over the following week, I quietly compiled a list of people I used to work with. Ones who stayed late, delivered under pressure, lifted others up even when they weren't lifted themselves. People like Julie, Kevin, Marcia from QA, Antonio in IT. I knew who deserved more, and I knew how to find them. It became a side mission. Every night after work, I combed through LinkedIn profiles. Every lunch break, I opened old Slack messages and client feedback logs. I remembered who made the machine run while Darren played executive. And one by one, I found ways to bring them here. Or at least try. But not everyone wanted to come. Some ignored my messages. Some replied politely with, "Thanks, but I'm not ready to leave the past behind." One message stayed with me longer than I'd like to admit. It was from Patrice, former accounting lead. "You got your promotion by watching the house burn after you left. Don't act like a hero now." I saved it in a folder I'd started called The Cost, because that's what it was. The cost of getting what you're worth when the system was built to keep you quiet. A week later, Emily and I presented the Talent Recovery Initiative to the board. It was a formal proposal to prioritize displaced Jennings and Rowe staff in our hiring pipeline. Training programs, referral bonuses, partnership with a career services firm. We'd even offer consulting positions to those nearing retirement or in career transitions. "You're sure this is the right move?" one board member asked. There are former competitors' people. Some might carry bad habits. Emily answered before I could. They were never the problem, she said. They were the solution their leadership failed to see. The board approved it unanimously. By the end of that month, 14 former Jennings and Rowe employees had joined us. Emma was promoted within 2 weeks. Antonio rebuilt our internal comm systems in record time. Kevin designed a new feedback loop that improved client response time by 30%. And the culture? Stronger, humbler, real. One morning, as I walked into the building, I saw a familiar face in the lobby. Darren. He looked like a ghost of himself. Thinner, paler, carrying a worn leather briefcase and a nervous smile. He stood up as I approached. Melissa, he said, voice tight. I'm not here to cause trouble. What are you here for? I asked, keeping my distance. They're saying you're hiring former J&R people. I need work. I've got a family, a mortgage. You know how this industry works. Once your name's attached to failure. He trailed off, waiting. I didn't speak for a moment. Then I said, I'm not in charge of executive hiring. I'll take anything, he added quickly. Consulting, training, even admin. I looked at the man who once told me I was replaceable, now standing in front of me, asking for a second chance. You said I burned bridges, I reminded him. He looked down. Turns out I was the one holding the matches. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just told him I'd pass along his resume. As I walked away, I realized something important. I didn't need to destroy him to win. He'd done that to himself. I just stopped trying to prove I belonged in a place that never saw me. 6 months had passed since I walked out of Darren's office for the last time. In that time, Jennings and Rowe lost 4 major clients, laid off over 60% of their staff, and quietly pulled out of 2 national campaigns. Rumors circulated about a potential merger. Others whispered about liquidation. I didn't watch with joy. I didn't watch with guilt either. I just observed, detached, like watching a familiar house fall in on itself, knowing you tried to fix the foundation, but no one listened. My life looked very different now. I had an office with a door and a view. A team of people who asked for my input, not my silence. A boss who credited my ideas publicly. A workload that was still heavy, but not thankless. And for the first time in years, I was sleeping through the night. Not from lack of responsibility, but because I no longer carried the weight of being invisible. One morning, I arrived early, before the building filled with footsteps and small talk. I liked the quiet hours best. It reminded me of all those mornings at Jennings and Rowe when I was the first one in and no one noticed. Only now I noticed, and it made all the difference. I made coffee, opened my inbox, reviewed a campaign brief from one of our junior strategists, Lexi. It was sharp, creative, and confident. Her voice was in the work. I made a note to tell her that. No edits, just a well done. Before I closed the file, I saw a line in her footer. Mentored by Melissa Carter. It made me pause. It was the kind of acknowledgement I used to wish for, long ago. At 11 a.m., Emma stopped by my office. They offered me the lead designer role, she said, eyes wide. I grinned. Of course they did. I'm not sure I'm ready. You've been ready for a while. You're just not used to being seen. She smiled, a little sad. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't left. I nodded. So do I. But you did, she added, and it made space for the rest of us to believe we could too. That afternoon, I reviewed another batch of resumes from former Jennings and Rowe employees. I didn't have to. I could have delegated it, but I wanted to, because I remembered their faces, their efforts, the way we all tried to hold up a system that was never built to hold us. Not everyone made it out. Some disappeared from LinkedIn entirely. Others pivoted to different industries. A few, like Patrice, still hadn't responded to outreach, but I kept a folder of their names. Not because I owed them, but because I understood the cost of staying. At 4 p.m., I got a message from HR. Subject, Darren Wells, application. I stared at it for a long time. He'd applied for a consulting role. No note, no cover letter. Just a name I knew too well and a resume full of jargon and half-truths. I didn't open it. Just clicked mark as read and closed the tab. There was nothing left to say. The truth was, Darren had already taught me the most important lesson of my career. Not by mentoring me, but by underestimating me. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. That night, as I packed up, I glanced at the framed copy of my original offer letter, the one from Jennings and Rowe. I'd kept it as a reminder of how little they thought I was worth. Next to it, I placed a small card Lexi had given me on my first day as her mentor. Thank you for making space for people like me. I hope I make you proud. She already had. As I turned off the lights in my office, I thought back to that moment, Darren's laughter echoing off the glass walls, his smirk, his dismissal, and how those two sentences, "If you want more money, get a job elsewhere," had pushed me out of one life and into another, a better one. One I built with quiet resolve, hard choices, and an understanding that value is never determined by a title, a manager, or a company. It's something you define for yourself. The real raise wasn't in my paycheck. It was in the respect I finally received, the peace I earned, the future I created. And no one could ever take that away again.